Types of lipids. We're talking about triglycerides today, and triglycerides store energy. They're the fat that's in your body, or oils. They're composed of one glycerol, which looks like this. So here's a glycerol molecule. It's got carbon to carbon to carbon. You certainly don't need to memorize this part, but you've got 3 carbons, and each of the carbon is attached to 1 or 2 hydrogens and to 1 oxygen. And then there are 3 fatty acid molecules. And so here's what one fatty acid molecule looks like. And I showed you these before, but I didn't draw it this way. So before, I drew it so that that carbon had a hydrogen sticking off of it on this side, and a hydrogen sticking off of it on this side. And that's where the H2 comes from. Then that carbon is going to be attached to this carbon. And instead of drawing the carbons in a circle around it, I just put H3. And so that's how sometimes scientists will draw this stuff. So put in the 3 H's here. And so what you have here is just this long chain of carbons with hydrogen sticking out on either side. And so instead of writing CH2, we could also write an H up here and an H down there, and that would be where the 2 hydrogens come from. But the idea is that every carbon is actually attached to another carbon, because remember, a carbon can make 4 bonds, 1, 2, 3, 4, but hydrogen only makes 1. So there are 3 fatty acids. Let's put the others in. Some of them are straight, like this one and this one, and some of them are bent, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. So there are 2 kinds of natural fatty acids that you might see in food labels. There are saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids, and that's what I was just talking about. So saturated means that it is absolutely saturated, absolutely filled with hydrogens. And so if you look at this, it's absolutely filled with hydrogens. For every carbon, there are 2 hydrogens sticking off of it before it attaches to the next carbon. Unsaturated is not so. This actually shouldn't be here. Pretend that's at the end. So here there's a bond right here. So if you look at this, here's CH2. Here's carbon with 2 hydrogens stuck to it. Pretend I drew those straight. And then that carbon is bound to this carbon. So far so good. It's got a hydrogen sticking off of it here. And notice that it's just 1 hydrogen. And then it's got a double bond. So carbon makes 4 bonds, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then here's this carbon I'm going to draw right here. That carbon's got its H sticking off here. And then the next carbon will be down here, and they'll just have 2 hydrogens sticking off on either side. So here this is bent, and so it's not saturated because it's missing a hydrogen here and a hydrogen here due to that double bond. So this would be called unsaturated. So if you look at a saturated fatty acid, it has no double bonds. So if you, let's go backwards for a minute. I think I want to draw it on the other page. So if you look at this saturated fat, if it's a straight chain, picture putting a whole bunch of straws into a box. They're all straight and they all pack really neatly. Look at that. Fit one on top of the other, and you could even maybe put some beside each other, and you could stick a lot in there. If you think of that example, maybe you could have the straws all bent at that spot, how they, if maybe you had the bendy straws and you could put them all in a box. You wouldn't be able to fit them in if they stayed bent. Or maybe you could picture sticks that are the same diameter, but they grow kind of bent. They don't all grow straight. So here I just drew 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 saturated fatty acids. Now I'm going to draw the unsaturated ones. Let's see if we can fit 6 in. There's 1. Here's 2. Here's 3. Here's 4. Here's 5. I don't know. It's kind of a bad picture, but here's the 6th one. So they take up a whole lot more space. You could try to shove them in, but they're not going to fit in the same kind of space as this. So the saturated ones, the ones that are totally packed with hydrogens, are straight. And so they can get compacted a lot better. So saturated tends to be solid at room temperature, whereas the unsaturated ones are all bent in funny directions. And so these tend to be liquids at room temperature. So let's look at the saturated fatty acids. There are no double bonds. They have as many hydrogens as possible, so they're absolutely saturated with hydrogens, which is where they get their name from. They're found in animal fats. So animals tend to need to move around because that's what animals do. And so they've got to store their energy in a really compact form. So animals tend to store their energy in the form of fat, and plants really don't do that as much. They do for seeds and stuff like that. But plants, so animals tend to, when they do, how can I say this? When plants have energy in fats, they still don't need them super compacted, but animals need to compact their energy as much as possible. And the fats in the fatty acids in animals are typically saturated, and so you can stick a lot of energy into things like butter. And they tend to be solid at room temperature. So they have a straight chain, which looks like that. And the chains lie close together, so you can squish a whole bunch in a single little area, so you have a lot of energy per volume. And because of you can squish a ton of stuff like this together, they tend to be solid at room temperature, and they're found mostly in animals. They are generally not healthy, although they are way healthier than trans fats, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So you have saturated fatty acids, and another natural type of fatty acid are the unsaturated fatty acids. These tend to be the healthiest for you, and they're found in oils. Plants tend to make these. So they have one or more double bonds, and that way they tend to be a bent chain. And so here's an example of one. Again, I don't know why I have this in the wrong place, but don't look at that. That was supposed to be at the end. I don't know how it got there. Anyway, if you look at this, you can see that it's a bent chain. And so because it's bent, you can't squish as many in the same spot, so the chains lie further apart. And they generally tend to be liquid at room temperature. They are found mostly in plant fats, and they're generally healthy. So let's take a look at the two. Let's compare the two. So here, these are both fatty acids, and this one is saturated because it has as many hydrogens as you could possibly fit on it. This one you can see the double bond, and this is called an unsaturated fatty acid. This particular fatty acid is a monounsaturated fatty acid. If you had a couple of double bonds, one here and maybe one over here, it would be a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And you probably heard of omega-3 and omega-6 and omega-9, and that's counted by where the double bond is. I can't remember if they count it from this side or this side, but this one might be, if you count it from this end, it would be a omega-3 fatty acid. I could be wrong. 1, 2, 5, 6. Maybe it's a sixth one. I don't know. But anyway, that's where those numbers come from. Here's the thing about this. Here's the important thing. The unsaturated ones are healthier in general than the saturated ones. But here's what you can do if you want to make an incredibly unhealthy unsaturated fat. What you could do is, instead of having the hydrogen over here, you could take this fat and you could heat it up to a really high temperature and bubble it, and what you'll end up having is this hydrogen will come over to this side, and so it will be on the trans side. Right now it's on the cis side. If you ever take organic chemistry, you'll learn that. They'll call it that. If you put that hydrogen over here and get rid of it over here, you'll still have the double bond, but this whole thing will actually be a straight chain instead, and then you can make this liquid into a solid at room temperature. So it tends to make these really kind of yummy desserts because they tend to be a straight chain, and they're cheaper than the animal fats that you get, the saturated fats. And for a long time we thought they were healthier, but as it turns out, trans fats are just super unhealthy for you. If you buy anything that says, let me just write this out, trans fats. If you, whoops, pretend that's two different words. So trans fatty acids. If you buy anything that says hydrogenated fat or partially hydrogenated fat, that's moving this hydrogen over, and that is quite bad for you. So try to avoid that. And that's it for triglycerides.